The air was thick and humid, clinging to the skin like an invisible second layer. It was the kind of heat that made everything move slower. The cars on the dirt road, the people bustling through the open-air market, and even the wind that barely rustled the palm trees overhead. Nia adjusted the strap of her backpack, her dark curls frizzing wildly around her face as she wiped a bead of sweat from her temple. She stood at the edge of the crowded bus station in Dakar, Senegal, her heart racing not just from the unfamiliar surroundings, but from the thrill of it all. This trip wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't the drop everything and leave type. But after years of corporate grind, the sleepless nights, the endless meetings, and the constant feeling that she was pouring her energy into a life that didn't feel like her own, Nia had decided to take a leap. She had saved for years, researching every corner of Africa she could visit, imagining a journey that would reconnect her with her roots and the woman she wanted to become. The bus to St. Louis was late. She didn't mind. It gave her a moment to absorb the vibrant chaos around her. The colors of the market stalls burst like a kaleidoscope. Brightly dyed fabrics draped over tables, mangoes and pineapples stacked high, and the faint metallic clang of women's bracelets as they exchanged goods. Somewhere nearby, a group of men were laughing, gesturing wildly as they slapped their domino pieces onto the table in quick succession. That was when she saw him. He wasn't loud or drawing attention like the men at the domino table. No, he was quiet. Leaning casually against the wall near the ticket counter, his head tilted slightly as he read a small notebook in his hand. His dark skin gleamed in the sunlight, and his beard framed his angular jaw perfectly. He had a quiet intensity about him, the kind of presence that pulled you in even if he wasn't trying. Nia found herself staring. She told herself it was because he was the first person who didn't look hurried or flustered. But when he glanced up and caught her looking, she knew it wasn't just that. There was something magnetic about him. His dark eyes lingered on hers for just a second, then slid back to his notebook, as if he hadn't just sent a jolt of electricity down her spine. The bus finally arrived in a plume of dust and exhaust. Nia climbed aboard, fumbling with her ticket as she looked for a seat. And there he was again, sitting by the window, the notebook now tucked away in his pocket. There were plenty of empty seats, but she found herself moving toward him, her heart thudding like a drum. "Mind if I sit here?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. He looked up, studying her for a moment before nodding. "Go ahead." His name was Amari, and by the time the bus pulled into St. Louis, they had talked about everything from their favorite childhood memories to the differences between Senegalese jollof rice and Ghanaian jollof. He was firmly on Team Senegal. Amari wasn't just traveling for the sake of adventure. He was a journalist, on assignment to document stories of local fishermen whose livelihoods were being affected by climate change. His passion for his work was evident in every word he spoke, his hands gesturing animatedly as he described the people he'd already met. Nia told him about her journey, how she was taking time to rediscover herself, to explore her heritage, and step away from the suffocating life she'd left behind in New York. She didn't go into details about the heartbreak that had preceded her trip, the long-term relationship that had ended just months before, leaving her unsure of who she was without someone else to define her. But somehow, she felt Amari saw through her anyway. By the time they stepped off the bus, Amari offered to show her around St. Louis. It was a picturesque city with its colonial architecture and brightly painted boats lining the shores. They walked along the narrow streets, their laughter mingling with the chatter of children playing soccer nearby. He introduced her to his favorite local spots, from a tiny cafe where they drank Bissap juice to a hidden bookstore filled with rare African literature. The sun was setting when they found themselves sitting on the edge of the pier, the water reflecting shades of orange and purple. Nia hadn't laughed like this in years. Amari leaned back on his hands, his eyes scanning the horizon. "You seem lighter," he said suddenly, turning to her. "Like you're finally letting go of something." His words caught her off guard. But she didn't deny it. "Maybe I am," she said softly. What started as a chance encounter became something neither of them had anticipated. They traveled together for weeks, from the vibrant streets of Dakar to the rolling savannahs of Tambacounda. They spent long hours talking about their dreams and fears, the struggles of being Black in a world that often tried to box them in, and the weight of carrying generational expectations while carving their own paths. But love, even when it feels fated, doesn't come without struggle. Amari's work kept pulling him away, sometimes for days at a time. And while Nia admired his dedication, she often found herself feeling like a secondary character in his story. She struggled to reconcile her growing feelings for him with the fear of losing herself again, of becoming someone who waited instead of someone who lived. Amari, too, wrestled with his own doubts. He had always been fiercely independent, focused on his goals. Falling for Nia was unexpected, and it terrified him. He worried that his life, constantly on the move, driven by stories that needed telling, wasn't the kind of stability she deserved. Their arguments were rare but intense. One night, as they sat in a small guest house in Gorée Island, Nia finally voiced what had been simmering beneath the surface. "I can't be the woman who waits, Amari," she said, her voice shaking. "I've spent too much of my life waiting, for people to show up, for life to happen, for someone else to make me feel whole. I can't do it anymore." Amari looked at her, his jaw tight. "And I can't stop doing what I do, Nia. This isn't just a job for me. It's who I am." Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Maybe we're not meant to fit together then." The silence that followed was unbearable. Amari reached for her hand, but she pulled it away. That night, she couldn't sleep, her heart heavy with the weight of loving someone who felt just out of reach. But love has a way of finding its own rhythm. The next morning, Amari knocked on her door, his face soft with an apology he didn't know how to put into words. "I don't want to lose you, Nia," he said quietly, "but I need you to be honest with me. Tell me what you need." She looked at him, her walls cracking just a little. "I need to know that I'm not just a stop on your journey, that I'm not going to be left behind." Amari stepped closer, his hands cupping her face. "You're not a stop. You're the reason I'm finally starting to understand where I want to go." Their love didn't solve everything, but it gave them something to hold on to. They learned to compromise, to create space for each other's dreams without losing themselves. Nia found her footing, writing essays about her travels that were published in magazines back home, while Amari continued his work, often inviting her to join him on assignments. Months later, as they stood together on a mountaintop in Rwanda, watching the sun rise over the misty hills, Amari pulled a small leather journal from his pocket. Inside, tucked between the pages, was a simple gold ring. "I don't want to keep moving without you," he said, his voice steady. "Wherever this journey takes us, I want us to do it together." Nia's tears fell freely this time as she nodded, her heart finally at peace. They had found each other in the chaos of the world, and somehow they had built something beautiful in the midst of it. Their love wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and that was enough.